If you're early, we're happy to have you. We'll get started promptly at 7, but thank you guys so much for joining us. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight. My name is Tarina Harris. I am the Policy Task Force Lead for The Future is Us, joined by our Community of Care co-coordinators, Jonathan Warren and Shanice Blair. They'll be helping with our tech and moderating the comment section for our Facebook and YouTube. If you're joining us from Twitter, we can't actually do the messages as easily. So feel free to hop on from YouTube, but if you can't, we're happy to have you anyway. We'll go ahead and get started. So I am the Policy Task Force Lead for the Future is Us initiative. We'll get started in just a bit, but before we do, I want to make sure that everyone gets as much as possible out of this workshop tonight. There's so much information that we can share about public comment, but what matters to us most is that you walk away with something useful to you, not just what we think you need. So we organize this especially for folks who have never attended a public meeting or never made public comments or maybe even never heard of public comments or public meetings before. So if you're just joining us, feel free to drop comments in the chat of any questions that you'd like answered about public comment. And then we'll do our best to answer questions in the chat as we go. And I will close out with a Q&A. So anything that doesn't get addressed in the chat or that maybe gets left unanswered, hopefully we can answer it at the end. There may be questions that we don't have answers for you for today, and we'll just be like, yeah, that's a really great question, but I don't know. But we'll come back next month, hopefully, with some answers to those questions. This is really, for us, also a helpful way to figure out what our community needs. And so we're hoping to host these workshops monthly, and we appreciate you for joining our first one and kind of having this learning experience with us. And the more that we know what you'd like to know, the better we can do showing up for you guys. So a bit of background, The Future is Us is a community initiative based in Galveston, Texas. We're funded by the Hogg Foundation for Mental Health's Communities of Care initiative in partnership with the Prevention Institute. The mission of The Future is Us is to fight for Galveston youth through community voice so future generations can meet their full potential. The initiative was born out of the need to address racial disparities in school discipline. When we began back in 2019, Black students in Galveston ISD were suspended 3 to 6 times more than their peers. And most of the recent data doesn't show that we're making the progress that we need in disrupting the school to prison pipeline. So we know that we want to make change, and we want that change to last beyond the funding. And so to do that, we have to make upstream changes to address social determinants of health. And a major part of that change is policy change. And that's where the Policy Task Force comes in. We're an arm of The Future is Us, and it's a space for students, for parents, and other community stakeholders and advocates. And it's designed to create policy change within our key areas. So that's arts and cultural expression, that's social networks and trust, and norms and culture. And we want to do that through community voice, and we want to achieve that through redistributing decision-making power into the communities that those decisions affect most directly. And so anything with the policy task force, it's usually really focused on achieving those goals in one of three ways. We want to educate, we want to organize, and we want to mobilize. So we want everyday community members to know how they can make a difference. We want them to know that they don't have to do it alone. And we want them to know that there are opportunities to do it like right now. Like you don't have to wait, you could do it right now. And so let's get into it. On this workshop, we're going to cover what public comment is. We're going to cover how you can make public comment. And most importantly, we're going to cover how you can make it impactful, and we'll close out with a Q&A. And I do want to add the caveat that for some people, I think everyone's joining from a different starting point. And I hope that this is as useful to as many people as possible. But the part that we're focusing on the most is really just understanding like, what is public comment? How does it exist? And that like everyone can participate in it. Although we want to be helpful for anyone who's watching who's never made public comment before, and since it's the internet, literally anyone can be watching. But since we're based in Galveston, most of the examples and especially the practices that we're going to be discussing are going to be specific to our city of Galveston City Council and to Galveston Independent School District public meetings. So what is public comment? Public comment happens during public meetings, and these are meetings where governing bodies gather to vote on matters that impact the public. These meetings are required to follow standards that are set in the Open Meetings Act. And throughout this workshop, we'll be dropping in the chat different links to some of the things that I'm referencing. So the key thing to know about public comment is that a member of the public is entitled to have a reasonable, or the language it's used is a reasonable amount of time to speak on matters that are on the agenda. They're entitled to having a reasonable amount of time to talk about something that's on the agenda. Examples of a governing body, so examples of groups that would be leading or groups that would be making decisions at public meetings include our local school board and our city council. And so I've included here, this is who our current city council and who our current local school board is. We have an election coming up, so it's going to change soon. But for right now, this is who is on our city council and our school boards. And these also have smaller boards under them and smaller commissions and task force under them. And so those smaller meetings, those smaller committees are also required to abide the Open Meetings Act as well. And so those smaller meetings will also have opportunities for public comment as well. In practice, most of our school board and city council meetings, the time limit for public comment is 3 minutes. So if someone's using an interpreter, they're actually entitled to twice the amount of time. And so here, that would mean they get to have 6 minutes. If somewhere else the public comment standard time is different, they're entitled to doubled whatever that set amount of time is. It's important to keep in mind that since public comment happens at open meetings, there's usually audio and video recordings that are available after the meeting. And a lot of times these things are also live streamed. And so don't say anything at public comment that you don't want to exist in perpetuity. Board members and commissioners also during public comment are not supposed to respond. They're not supposed to respond directly to your comment, and they're not supposed to respond during your comment. And so if your comment includes things like questions, and it's like, why aren't they answering my questions? They're not supposed to. It's really supposed to be a time for them to just sit and listen and hear directly from you. The Open Meetings Act requires that the public have the opportunity to comment on agenda items before the board or the commission takes a vote on them. So this might look like having all of the public comment at the beginning, which is how our regular school board meetings usually do it. The other ones, like the other committees under the school board, tend to do it differently. It just depends. Or the public comment might be kind of spread throughout the agenda. So if there's an agenda item about housing, public comments on housing would happen at that time. If there's a later item in the agenda about grants, that's when the public comment about grants would be happening. But the main point is that no matter how the meeting is run, if a council or a board or a commission is going to vote on something, on a specific whatever, whatever they're voting on is going to impact the public. So it's important that the public has the opportunity to give their input, to share their experiences, to give their perspective before that vote is taken. Because ideally, the decisions that our government makes should reflect our best interests. And the reality is, most of our local leadership is not demographically or culturally representative of the diversity and the experiences of our community. And so it's one thing for someone to make a decision from a space of not having access to information, but public comment is a really powerful way to know that your leadership was given access to that information. Becomes a matter of watching what's done with it. This means that public comment is a mechanism of accountability and that we can celebrate when our leadership make decisions in light of the interests of the community. And we can also recognize patterns when decisions are being made in spite of those interests. It's also important to know that most of our local meetings also allowed for public comment on non-agenda items. So that means that you might have a comment on something that happened like that morning or the day before that wasn't on the agenda. But for most of our public meetings, you can still make a public comment about that. And for public comment from individuals who don't reside within the jurisdiction of the governing body. So they also usually allow, like, if you know that there's going to be a city council meeting, you don't necessarily have to live in Galveston to comment at a city council meeting. Because of the way that Galveston's community is made up, we have a lot of people who work or go to school or own businesses or volunteer or donate or in an array of other ways participate in our community. And the way that our local practices, the way that our local norms when it comes to public meetings are, there's space for those voices at public comment too. So if you make a public comment on a non-agenda item, it's possible for it to be added to a future agenda, like that's a thing that could happen. Other ways of bringing up a concern or a matter that you'd want to be addressed in a later agenda, like which you can totally do. You can do that by contacting your officials. So if there's something that you would really like them to deliberately discuss as an agenda item, you can ask your local officials to add that to the agenda. And so the agenda for city council meetings is set by the mayor with input from the city council. And so we'll share all of that contact information in the chat with you as well. The emails, the phone numbers, all of that is public. And the agenda for Galveston ISD school board meetings is set by the superintendent with input from the school board president and the school board. And so we'll include that information there too. So the mayor of Galveston is Craig Brown. Our school board president is Tony Brown. I don't think they're related, could be, I don't know. And the current superintendent is Jerry Gibson. Like I said, we'll include all of that contact information in the chat. And if you signed up for this event ahead of time, we'll also send this information to you via email. If you didn't sign up ahead of time and you want to like quickly do that form, you can. But whatever emails I have by the time we finish this workshop are the emails that I will be sending this information to. So now that we have a clear idea, or hopefully a clearer idea of what public comment is, let's get into how you make one. Although every public meeting is a little bit different, if you're planning to make a public comment, the common steps are to find the agenda, to identify options for attending, to write out your public comment, to fill out the public comment form, and to make sure that you keep an eye on your time. So as far as finding the agenda, you'll want to find the agenda, the meeting agenda, because it's where you'll have all of the meeting information. and it'll show you like the location of the meeting, the time of the meeting. You'll know what's going to be discussed during the meeting. Most of the regular meetings for Galveston City Council and for Galveston ISD keep a regular schedule, but not always, because sometimes there are special meetings. And so there are a couple of ways to know ahead of time when a meeting is coming up, and to also then access that agenda ahead of time. For open meetings through the city of Galveston, you can actually sign up to get notifications. You can get like text. You can basically get a text or an email anytime a meeting is coming up. The Open Meeting Act requires that public notice be given 72 hours before a meeting. So they can't decide at 9 a.m. that they're going to have a meeting at 5 p.m. Like, it doesn't work that way. That'd be violating the Open Meetings Act. So there will always be notice given 72 hours ahead of time. You can go on the city's website, or you can Google City of Galveston Agenda Center. We'll also drop a link in the chat, where you'll be able to see all of the cities, the different boards, the different commissions. All of these are public meetings, and so all of them will have the opportunity for public comment. Here you'll be able to not only see the agenda for the upcoming meetings, but when you access the agenda through the Agenda Center on the city's website, there will also be links to documents that are referenced in that meeting. So there will be things like links to budgets, links to proposals, links to ordinances, memos, any information that's being referenced in the agenda. So you're not just going to see a list of things that will be discussed, but you're accessing like the written, detailed information about what's going to be voted on and discussed. The other really cool thing about the Agenda Center is that you can see minutes from past meetings as well. Oh, and here you can kind of see what it looks like when you pull up the agenda. It'll have like the hyperlinks and whatnot. So if you want to receive notifications for upcoming meetings, when you go to the Agenda Center, towards the top right, there will be a little space where it has this Notify Me button. You'll click that, and it'll take you to a page where you can sign up to receive texts or emails at any time public notice or that an agenda is posted. So if you're only interested in city council meetings, you can select that option, and you'll only receive texts and emails about city council meetings. If you're interested in cultural arts or in housing or in development, you'll click on those and you'll be able to receive those too. I really, really, really appreciate this feature because, as important as public comment and public meetings are, I'd be lying if I was like, and I go to the city's website every day to check for them. I don't, but I'm super grateful that I can have them sent directly to me, and it's a really helpful way to stay on top of it. So when it comes to Galveston ISD, because they're a separate entity, as far as I know, they don't currently have something that's a similar option, or they don't currently have that as an option. So when you want to find the agenda for the school board meetings, you can just Google like Galveston ISD school board meeting, and it should be the first like link, or you can go to gisd.org/board-of-trustees. We'll drop that link in the chat. And from this page, you'll be able to see the most immediate meeting. So when you go to that first page where it's talking about the boards of trustees, they usually do a pretty good job of having like whatever the next meeting coming up is, or the next couple meetings coming up. They'll have those there. On the left side of the page, you'll see a different menu of options. And so you can go to board agenda and minutes, and then that will take you to all of the upcoming and past board meetings and committee meetings. You'll be able to view the public notice and agenda. When you access the agenda from this site, you'll have access to the same kind of attachments that you'd see at the city. So it'll have the same kind of format of, there's hyperlinks where you can click and see full budgets. You can click and see whatever like policy, or if they're voting on it and it's referenced as a document, you'll be able to click on and actually read what document they're going to vote on. And we'll drop a link in the chat for that as well. The policy task force uses a shared Google Calendar where we try to do our best to include upcoming school board meetings. And so if you want to stay in the loop that way, since I don't know and haven't seen how to sign up to get notifications straight from GISD's website, that's an option. We usually have weekly policy task force meetings, and in those meetings, we kind of name like, here are the upcoming events, here's links to the agendas, the upcoming school board meetings. And so if keeping up with those meetings in that way is something that you're interested in, you can let us know and we'll drop a link in the chat for how to do that as well. And so the next part for making a public comment is finding out what are the options for attending. And so not every meeting, not every public meeting is required to have a virtual option, but if there is a virtual option available, it'll show at the top of that meeting agenda. And most virtual options are Zoom, but not all of them. Like our housing authority, they use something else that's not Zoom. They don't have to use Zoom. I like Zoom. I'm biased, but that's beside the point. So if you're going in person and you aren't really sure where the meeting is located, even though there's like it's on the agenda and it has an address, but like I've struggled the first time I was going to GISD's admin annex building. So there's usually also a phone number or like an email address on the top of the meeting agenda, and you can call that number or send that email address and be able to ask someone there. And if you're like it's 5 minutes before the meeting and you can also try to reach out to us via email if you have questions, or if there's a meeting that you found out was happening but are having a hard time finding it. We also want to try to be a resource for you as well. As far as joining virtually, there have been instances where connection is lost or there are other technical difficulties. So I always recommend joining the meetings in person if you can, but joining virtually is better than not joining at all. Regardless of how you're joining, it's best to know what you're going to say before you say it. So the third step in making a public comment is ideally writing your public comment out. Like I said, you get 3 minutes, and that's usually about 450 words, depending on how fast you talk. If you're not used to public speaking, sorry, I lost my place. If you're not used to public speaking, it can be helpful to write out what you're going to say before you say it. Whether you're someone who likes to type and then print it out, or if you want to handwrite it, or even just jotting it down on your phone, it's super helpful to have all of your thoughts and points existing somewhere out of your head. Even if you don't end up using it, and even if you don't go up during public comment with it, which you totally can, you're absolutely allowed to. Writing it out ahead of time is just a really good way of making sure that you have all of your thoughts out. And then the next thing you'll need to do is to fill out the public comment form. And so when you get to the meeting, ideally you'll want to get there maybe 5 to 10 minutes early, and you'll be asked, if you're planning to make public comment, you're supposed to fill out a public comment form. And so it'll ask you to include things like your name, your contact information, your address, and what you'll be commenting about. In my experience, it doesn't have to be super detailed. You don't need to write out all 450 words. But if you're going to address or if you're going to make a public comment about a specific agenda item, that's where you'll want to note it there. The person collecting these will usually give them to the person that's conducting the meeting. So either they'll take it and give it to the chair, or they'll give it to the person who's helping facilitate the meeting. So there's usually someone who's maybe kind of secretary adjacent. That's who they'll hand your public comment form to. There's usually somebody kind of nearby that you'll hand your paper to, or that you can ask, like, hey, where do I hand my paper to? And I'm going into all of this detail because when I've gone to make public comment, I'm like, I don't know where to put this. And so I think that's a universal experience, and just want to like at least share and address that. Then they'll call your name up. So once they have all the papers, they'll start the meeting. When it's time for public comment, they'll call your name during the appropriate time. So like I said, it might be one after another all together at the beginning of the meeting, or it might be kind of spread throughout the meeting, and you'll be making the comment during the time that's been set for that agenda item. Whether you've filled out the form or not, they're usually at the end of the public comments, or at the end of the papers that they have. They'll usually ask if there's anyone else who wants to make a comment that maybe hadn't had a chance to submit the paper. And then they'll usually move to see if there's anyone joining virtually, or if anyone's submitted a written public comment. So specifically for city meetings, they allow, if you're not joining in person, or if you're joining virtually and you're not comfortable speaking, or if you're not able to speak to make a public comment, you can submit a written public comment. And when you do that, they just read it out loud for you on your behalf during the public comment portion of the meeting. And so this form will ask you very similar questions to what's being asked in the in-person form, but you'll also be asked to include the what body. So like if it's for city council, if it's for park, whatever, and then there will be space for you to write your public comment. And we'll include a link to that also in the chat. So the last thing is you'll want to keep an eye on your time. Most of our public meetings, like I said, it's 3 minutes, it's about 450 words, depending on how fast you speak. So if you're using a translator, again, you're entitled to having twice as much time. Excuse me, I'm so sorry. It's a long day, empty tummy, lots of coffee. I usually, when I'm doing public comment, I take my phone with me so that I can use the clock app and keep track for myself and just kind of be mindful of how much time I have left. Sometimes there will be a timer, like at city council, they usually have a timer that's facing you, or at the school board meetings, the regular school board meetings are usually a timer that you can see, but not every meeting does that. And so it's just helpful to make sure that you're able to keep an eye on your time so that if there's any super important point that you wanted to make that you didn't get out and you see that you have 10 seconds left, that point doesn't go unmade and you don't get cut off in the middle. So really, like, you can still make public comment even if you don't do any of this. Like, I can't tell you the number of times when I found out through the grapevine that there's going to be a public meeting happening because somebody told me. And so sometimes it's just as simple as like, as long as you know where to be and when, there will be printed agendas when you get there. And let me see. Bum, 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 bum. From there, you can just kind of, speak for your heart. This is intended to be a resource. Like, this is not intended to be super overwhelming. You don't have to have this workshop in order to show up and make a public comment. And even if you've done this workshop, if there's a public meeting that you're going to and that you want support, that's what we're here for. So you can always reach out if you just want someone to go with you, or if you have more questions, or if there's a specific meeting that you heard about and just want kind of some of that moral support. That's what we're here for too. So the last thing that I want to kind of go over is how to make an impactful public comment. And I won't read the list. We'll just go through it together. This part is just really important to me because I think that it's such a valuable tool, and I feel like my community is full of like so many just valuable voices, and so I just really want you to feel validated, and like public comment is absolutely a space where your voice like is entitled and deserves to exist. So the first like thing I would say is to be yourself, and to be secure in showing up exactly as you are. You belong in that space just as much as anybody else in the room. None of us are a monolith, meaning like just because I'm single mother doesn't mean that I speak for all single mothers. Just because I'm a millennial doesn't mean I speak for all millennials. And just because I enjoy poetry doesn't mean I speak for all poets. But in the same coin, everything I experience in the world is as a poet, is as a mother, and is as a millennial. And I'm speaking from my experiences. And many of those experiences are going to be different than our current leadership. And so leading with my identity means leading with the belief that my interests, my experiences, and my needs are no less worthy of being represented than anyone else's. I believe that in my bones. A small caveat is because Galveston's so small, a lot of us wear a lot of different hats. And so depending on the issue or depending on the topic, if you work for and or are affiliated with whatever organization, just being clear on for yourself and for whoever you're accountable to. Are you speaking on behalf of yourself? Are you speaking on behalf of that organization? If you are, like, has that been made clear? All of that is really important. The second thing is to be specific. So what is the event or the agenda item or the ordinance, the policy, whatever, that you're going to be addressing? If you have time in advance, there's a lot of really like quick with an asterisk, easy with an asterisk ways to kind of look up more, research more before you make your public comment. You can look up the attachments on the agenda. And if you have questions about those, like you can email the city and be like, yo, I have questions about this, or like that's what they're there for. You can look at past recordings of previous meetings. And so, like I mentioned, a lot of those meetings are recorded. You can go back and watch some of those recordings. And in later workshops, I'll get into more details on how to access that. You can do a keyword search for the Galveston Daily News. A lot of the articles are paywalled. I'm sure you have a friend with a subscription. Um, you can even look in some of the comments on those and or on some of the different Galveston Facebook groups. So like Galveston Talk, Galveston Schools Talk, even if not everything you read, which not everything you read, if you're going to those different spaces, is going to be necessarily factual, but it does give you a glimpse of like, what is the current conversation happening around this issue, or what's the current narrative? What do I know about that? It just helps you go in and it helps you speak from a more informed place. If you know what the rhetoric or what the narrative is around whatever the issue is that you're wanting to discuss. You can also do, because we have a lot of like UTMB and TAMUG and all of that, like you can look for different research articles that speak to the issue that you're wanting to address during public comment, or even looking at how have other communities handled this issue, or what have other communities done to address this issue. The next thing I would say is to back up your words. So, what do you think they need to know in order to make an informed decision, or in order to make an informed vote? What do you want them to know or understand? What data or personal experiences do you want to inform their decision? What are you asking them to make a decision based on? What are the competing priorities that need to be named explicitly and out loud? What information do you feel is really, really important in order for them to make a decision that is truly in the best interest of the community? The next thing that you'd want to kind of take into consideration is like, what's your ask? Like, what do you want them to do about whatever you're making public comment about? What vote are you asking them to make? What item are you asking them to add to the agenda? What actions are you asking them to take? What position, action, or population are you asking them to stand up for or to hold accountable? And to address accountability. So, whatever you're asking of leadership, you should be able to answer the question, why should they? Like, if I'm asking you to do something, like, I want to also be able to be like, and this is why you should do the thing I'm asking you to do. In a generation that was like raised with because I said so, I know that can be a little hard, but I believe in us so much. So, even if it seems self explanatory, like, explain it anyways. What kind of appeal are you making? Are you asking them to act in the interest of morals, or in the interest of financial competence, or on ethical principles, or making an emotional appeal from one human being to another? Another thing that you can do is remind them of their roles or the bylaws. That's one way to even make a public comment without necessarily having to prepare or do a bunch of writing yourself. Not everyone has like the time or the comfort of writing out 450 words. That's a whole assignment. I get it. You can speak on how that vote upholds or maybe undermines a mission statement, or a vision, or a value statement, or an oath that's been taken by that body of leadership. What do you want them to know that their decisions say about the values or priorities? And so it's ultimately up to you what you want to achieve in your public comment. Like, we're not here to tell you necessarily, I'm specifically me, I'm speaking for myself. I'm not here to tell you like exactly how you should advocate or what you should be advocating for today, at least. But I very much operate from a space of the more impact your decisions have on others, the more responsibility you have for other people. And so that's why for the Future is Us, like, our mission is very much rooted in community voice. So that takes us to our Q&A portion. And so you guys are welcome to drop questions in the comments if you have any, and I'll give like a couple of minutes for that. Thank you to the 8-ish people that I see watching. I really appreciate you guys joining us. And so if there are any questions that you have that have not been answered so far, please feel free to put them in the comments. If you're joining from Twitter, we can't see those comments from here. I feel like we used to be able to, but now we can't. But if you want to hop over to our YouTube, you can add the comments there, and and we'll be able to see them that way. And so I'll give it maybe one more minute. And if we don't have any questions, I'm going to take it as we answered all of them on the front end. It's my positive thinking. And while we're waiting, I'll go ahead and kind of go to some of our upcoming public meetings. So like I said, we want you to know that there's stuff to do, that you don't have to do it alone, and that you don't have to wait to do it. You can do it now. So the next public meeting, and there are other ones, these are just the ones that are like most relevant to the work of the Future is Us. There's a Galveston ISD Finance Committee meeting coming up on April 18th. At 6 p.m. That's at the GISD Annex building on 39th and T. And then that's tomorrow. And then the next regular school board meeting is Wednesday night, and that's also at 6 p.m. At the same location. Let us know if you need any help finding it. Other things that we'd really love to share is the Future is Us upcoming events. So we have this really cool thing we do called Books and Breakfast, and our next Books and Breakfast event will be April 25th at 6:30 at Rosenberg Library. You've had breakfast for dinner before, so we're having breakfast for dinner. It's a really great event. We give away free books, we give away food, we get to be in community with each other. Super dope. May 3rd, we have Stories That Matter. Felicia French is our community engagement person putting that together, and it'll really just be a time for folks to gather together on live stream and share their stories and be heard, all of that. There are our youth and some of our other folks that we work with in our collaborative were invited to share a bit about our work at La Sierra Surf and Music Fest. And so we will be there, the Future is Us will be there May 7th at 5. And then May 20th at 11 a.m. at Wright CUNY, we'll have Family Matters Kickback. And so that's another just chance for us to be together as a community. And then we will have our next public comment workshop May 29th at 7 p.m. And it's going to be on live stream again. And so this one, very much, we wanted to make sure that we just made it super accessible to everyone, maybe who's never done public comment before. In future ones, if you want more on just focusing on the public comment writing itself, if you want more on what are the different boards and commissions, whatever those interests are, please feel free to let us know. And really, that's all I have. And so if there are no questions, feel free to keep in touch with us. Our Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter are all at The Future is Us Galveston. We have our YouTube, our TikTok, and you can also reach out to us via email. And so that's really all I have. Thank you all again for joining us, and I'm really excited to have the opportunity to host and co-host this with John and Shanice. Thank you, Roxy, for being so active in the comments, and I hope that you all have a good night. Take care.